At exactly 4:31 a.m., the financial heart of America skipped a beat. General Motors confirmed a jaw-dropping $1.1 billion quarterly loss. And the tremor isn't just economic, it's political seismic and possibly irreversible. The so-called patriotic tariff war has turned into a slow-motion suicide bleeding the very industries it promised to protect. The steel meant to shield jobs is slicing through the veins of U.S. competitiveness. In a twisted irony, every bolt and beam now carries a death sentence for affordability. While Canada surges with a billion-dollar reindustrialization push, the U.S. staggers under the crushing weight of its own economic nationalism. And behind it all, one signature one man has reshaped America's trade policy into a weapon of self-inflicted damage. This isn't just policy, it's ideology turned wrecking ball. With tariffs as high as 50% on essential materials like aluminum and steel and 25% on automotive parts, the cost of protectionism is exploding like shrapnel into boardrooms, union halls, and grocery stores. The White House paints it as patriotic defense, but tell that to the factory worker watching his plant shutter while the competition overseas booms. These aren't invisible costs, they're stamped onto every SUV, every sedan, every wrench on the assembly line. $3,000 added to a truck, $4,700 on some sedans. These are not abstract numbers. They're the difference between a second shift or a pink slip between a full fridge or another skipped grocery run. And while the president boasts about making America great again, through trade walls his closest neighbor is building something far more dangerous: independence. Canada, without begging or blinking, mobilized. Steel mills resurrected. Permits fast-tracked. $1 billion in federal funds moved faster than any congressional hearing. Formerly silent plants are now roaring. Hydroelectric-powered arc furnaces are producing cleaner steel, just as Europe starts paying premiums for low-carbon imports. As American policymakers cheer tariff revenues, Canadian executives sign long-term contracts with Asia and Europe. Ton by ton, they are replacing Detroit as the first call for quality steel. And here's the knife twist. While U.S. manufacturers scramble to fill supply gaps with outdated furnaces and overpriced raw materials, Canada's steel is already boarding ships bound for Yokohama, Rotterdam, and Busan. America's Midwest, the Steel Belt, the Auto Belt, the so-called comeback zone, is being left behind not by foreign enemies, but by its own policies. And while geologists warn that America's domestic metal reserves are both underdeveloped and underfunded, Washington insists the mines in Minnesota and furnaces in Indiana can save the day. Reality disagrees. The investments needed to match Canadian modernization would take years, not executive orders. And the supply chain. It's not just cracking, it's collapsing. So here's the real question: when allies become competitors, and America first starts meaning America alone, who pays the price? Spoiler alert, it's not the politicians signing the orders. It's people like Derek in Flint, Michigan, and Sarah in Cleveland watching the prices rise and the promises vanish. Detroit may once have been the engine of American prosperity, but now it's grinding its gears against a wall built by its own government. Derek, a third-generation welder, doesn't need macroeconomic charts to understand what's happening. He just watches the cost of milk and the coffee at the plant cafeteria tick upward every week. His father once believed in tariffs as a lifeline. Today, Derek calls them a trap. Across the border in Seoul, Ste. Marie, the Canadian steelworks, hums in 3 shifts. Welders who fled to Alberta for oil money are returning home with 5-year contracts and union benefits. Their products, now certified low-carbon and backed by Europe's climate incentives, are shipped out faster than they can be forged. Meanwhile, American plants cling to outdated equipment and volatile prices. Ottawa's message to Washington was clear: they're not begging for exemptions, they're building alternatives. While Washington issues proclamations, Ottawa builds policy. And the world is taking notice. The European Union fast-tracks a green steel corridor with Canada. Japan locks in nickel contracts for battery gigafactories. Germany signs a uranium deal for its next-generation reactors. Even France, still haunted by the loss of Russian gas, signs memorandums of understanding with Canadian energy companies to secure nuclear fuel. In contrast, Washington pushes promises emergency mining subsidies, tax credits, pledges of strategic autonomy. But these plans take years, and markets don't wait. The White House may cheer a $300 billion tariff revenue, but fails to mention that every cent comes from consumers like Sarah in Cleveland struggling to afford a hybrid car as prices spiral. Her monthly payment now exceeds her overtime hours. The dealer whispers that others are turning to Korean imports or Mexican-built models, vehicles not burned by America's metal war. Inflation isn't some ghost story. It's a shopping list nightmare. From dog food cans to hot water repairs, every price tag tells the story of a failing strategy. Even the Federal Reserve's internal charts look like cardiac monitors on the brink. Transportation costs leading the surge driven by the very metals now buried under tariffs. As purchasing managers scratch their heads over contracts and CEOs postpone factory upgrades, the dominoes fall. Long-term deals vanish. Confidence evaporates. Investment flees. The U.S. finds itself not leading a trade alliance, but watching its partners quietly reroute supply lines. Mexico signs steel import agreements with Brazil. Vietnam receives Chinese funding to double its aluminum output. The labels on American soda cans now read, "Made in Ho Chi Minh City." On Capitol Hill, officials call this rebalancing. In the real world, it's abandonment. Foreign allies no longer trust Washington to hold steady. Overnight rule changes, politically driven tariffs, and unclear exemptions have made doing business with America a gamble. Better to diversify. The world is moving on. Trade bridges are being built, bypassing the U.S., one after another. In Houston, a geopolitical risk analyst bluntly warns an oil client, the new gold isn't black. It's lithium, cobalt, and reliability, and Canada has both. The client asks, what's left for America? The silence in the room says everything. In Youngstown, Ohio, Derek removes his helmet after a grueling night shift and checks his phone. The union is calling for a partial strike over frozen wages amid rising inflation. He scrolls past headlines about record Treasury revenues and zeroes in on his grocery bill. Coffee's up another 10 cents. Milk 20. His grandfather believed in Roosevelt's industrial promise. His father rallied behind the tariff dream of economic rebirth. Derek now sees the steel wall not as protection, but as a prison. Meanwhile, north of the border, Canadian uranium drills are humming in Saskatchewan. The ore is so pure, it makes European nuclear operators salivate. France has inked deals to fuel a third of its reactors. Germany, newly orphaned by Russian gas, is exploring long-term contracts with Ontario-based firms. While U.S. mines in Wyoming sleep under lawsuits and lack funding, Canada quietly becomes the gatekeeper of clean energy's backbone. The White House floats emergency subsidies, but even geologists warn reviving uranium infrastructure isn't a fiscal cycle, it's a generational endeavor. And yet, the digital economy demands uninterrupted power. Silicon Valley knows this. That's why Amazon Web Services has signed decade-long deals with Ontario Power Generation for stable nuclear energy. Google and Microsoft follow suit, securing a pipeline of clean Canadian electrons for the next decade of cloud dominance. Each agreement tightens Ottawa's grip on the digital arteries of the U.S., and it doesn't stop at energy. Nickel from Sudbury, cobalt from Quebec, Canada, is emerging as the preferred supplier for the West's electric revolution. Japan secures exclusive access to Canadian nickel for its battery plants. China responds by slashing rare earth prices. But Tokyo isn't tempted. Reliability beats cost in a world where shipping routes and political whims can shut supply chains overnight. Back in Washington, panic simmers beneath the surface. The administration organizes a summit with Detroit's automotive giants to push for rapid reshoring. The pitch tax credits for domestic steel and aluminum production. The room is silent. The CEOs know the truth. Revamping ancient blast furnaces in Indiana or Ohio costs billions. Competing with Canadian hydro-powered electric arc furnaces isn't about patriotism, it's about math. Many U.S. mills still run on 1960s technology. No executive can sign off on modernizing without guarantees that American policy no longer offers. And while politicians argue over subsidies, tech giants are bypassing the Beltway. The influence once claimed by U.S. industry is now wielded by Ontario's clean power plants and Sudbury's mines. It's no longer about who makes the metal, but who controls its flow. Meanwhile, in Michigan, union cafeterias' slogans about making America strong again ring hollow. Layoffs creep in billed as temporary, but workers know better. Their reality is shrinking hours, rising mortgages, healthcare worries, and whispered talk of relocation. A PE research poll reveals a damning statistic: 61% of Americans now associate tariffs with rising prices, not job security. And this sentiment is fueling political fatigue, not pride. Across the Rust Belt, the myth of economic sovereignty is unraveling thread by thread. In Bowling Green, Kentucky, a drivetrain plant receives its third revised price sheet in 5 months. The CFO compares spreadsheets like a surgeon reading lab results. Each cent added to steel trims half a customer from their sales forecast. The books once healthy now bleed gray. Shifts are on the chopping block. Mexico looks like salvation, but admitting that would mean confessing the failure of the very doctrine that got them here. On Capitol Hill, the spin machine grinds on. Trade representatives tout flexibility. One day, a 25% tariff is gospel. The next, it's subject to adjustment for strategic allies. No CFO can build a 12-month procurement plan on that kind of volatility. Contracts get shorter. Risk premiums balloon. In the backrooms of global finance, this isn't seen as strength, it's seen as instability. Japan and the UK saw it coming. They secured stabilized 15% tariffs in emergency side deals, not as rewards, but as damage control. In Tokyo, diplomats called it a flood barrier. In London, it was post-Brexit pragmatism. The tabloids cheered that Liverpool's shipyards could keep buying Pennsylvania steel without lethal surcharges. But Ottawa refused to play the same game. No deal is better than a bad deal, repeated Mark Carney, doubling down on green subsidies and fast-tracking decarbonization for Canada's metal sector. Each day without a treaty was another contract signed in euros, another ship routed through Rotterdam. The global game shifted from ideology to logistics. In Saskatchewan's plains, uranium drillers attract European utility giants. France pens deals covering a third of its nuclear fleet. Germany, still healing from Russian gas trauma, sees Canada as a clean energy partner, not a neighbor's subordinate. Meanwhile, Washington dangles tariff reductions in exchange for critical mineral access. Ottawa doesn't beg. It offers alliances, not compromises. If the door remains closed, one trade official says the metal sails east. Japan, reading the room, inks a nickel deal for its EV battery plants. China counters with rare earth discounts. Tokyo shrugs. It would rather pay more for political stability. And here's where the map changes forever. The White House pushes for domestic reindustrialization through tax breaks and executive orders, but the industry doesn't follow. The cost curve is too steep. Decades of neglect can't be reversed with press conferences. Silicon Valley has moved on. They need power, not promises. Ontario delivers both. AWS signs a 10-year energy contract. Microsoft and Google split the next decade's capacity. Every kilowatt sold is a vote of confidence, just not for Washington. In the American Midwest, this is more than policy, it's personal. Derek sees co-workers suspended. Sarah skips doctor appointments. Talk shows praise record tariff revenue, but it all feels like smoke. A rhetorical wall is no substitute for a functioning supply chain. And while pundits cry economic patriotism, families ask why their grocery carts feel lighter every month. This is no longer just economics. It's identity. It's betrayal dressed as strategy. And it's leaving scars that no stimulus check can heal.